Afternoon, everyone. So it's my job to, I guess, bring us back to Earth in a way, because we're going to get into the plumbing of what makes the Earth and humanity work, okay? I'll introduce my fellow panelists, and then I want to talk about something else before we jump into the panel. So on the panel we have Sonny Garg, tremendous person, Chief Innovation Officer from Exelon and now in a Brad Keywell startup, so done the transition from corporate to entrepreneur. John Samuel, Group Head, Social Engagement, Anglo-American. And last, CEO Managing Director of Chrysalix Ventures up in Canada. So before we start the panel, I have a very special and exciting announcement in regards to the Kin Catalyst, the mining company of the future, that I've been co-chairing with Mark Kudafani, Chief Executive of Anglo-American for the last 4 years. What I'm about to announce, and I'll kind of build up to it, it's kind of like the Academy Awards, I guess, but I think what we're about to announce really represents the very best of the Kellogg Innovation Network. What we've done for the last 4 years does that, but this takes us into a new dimension, it really does. And really is a landmark moment for the kind of impact that we can have. To provide a little bit of context, first is what is a Kin Catalyst? So this is a multi-step process that we developed to tackle intractable and complex multi-stakeholder issues that industry or countries face, with a goal to drive impact and to inspire transformation from those stakeholders. So I want to show a brief video that describes the journey that we've been on for the last 4 years. So if we roll the video, please.
What does it take to transform an industry? How do you fundamentally shift the way an industry views its role in the world? The Kellogg Innovation Network at the Kellogg School of Management set out to do just that, and we started with one of the largest industries in the world, mining. The Kellogg School provided a neutral platform to bring together key stakeholders from both inside and outside the mining industry to begin to envision what an inclusive model for development might look like, shifting the mindset of mining from an extractive industry to a regional development partner. Over the next 2 years, the Kin Catalyst Mining Company of the Future convened multi-stakeholder working groups in Brazil, the UK, and the US to co-create and refine the development partner framework and catalyze the days of reflection for industry leaders at the Vatican and the Church of England. Then in December 2014, the Kin Catalyst Development Partner Framework was launched at the Ford Foundation in New York City.
What we know is that the world we live in is not a binary world. And the solutions that we must find are going to be found from pragmatic people committed to problem solving and working together.
The Development Partner Framework actually defines a different way of thinking and operating for mining companies that will help them, I think, engage better with local communities, with governments and all of our broader stakeholders so that we can develop partnerships and make sure that we have everyone in community as partners in the projects or the developments that we put forward.
The Development Partner Framework is an approach and a set of principles designed to encourage and inspire organizations to engage with countries, communities and Indigenous people and other stakeholders in a new and different way. The Kin Development Partner Framework has 3 primary pillars: shared purpose, thriving ecosystems, and competitive countries, communities, and companies. It is designed to have the mining industry think in a different way and think about the legacy that it leaves beyond the life of mine, and think about developing a much more shared purpose and shared value that all stakeholders can realize the true value of resource developments around the world.
The beauty of the Development Partner Framework is it's bringing all those issues together in one place. It's creating a framework in which one can view these various issues in a comprehensive way. And in many ways, it's suggesting, if you will, a mindset shift for the industry to think of itself less as an industry responsible only for what it is doing inside the fence, delivering value to shareholders, but also what it's doing to affect the communities around the mine sites who are in effect stakeholders in the larger development of those regions in which it's operating.
It's constructive. It's looking forward, not trying to hide, I think, from the legacy issues of the past, of which there are many, but they're also trying to look forward and say what are mining companies in the future and what is our constructive contribution to society, given that we all depend on it.
We believe we could be characterised as a development industry if we rethink the model and the way we frame our activities.
The King Catalyst is going to foster partnerships between different companies, different players, different stakeholders in the mining business. And those players working together will be able to do different things to transform the mining business from being just an economic engine to being an economic, social, and environmental engine.
What the initiative here does is really bring the opportunity to accelerate collaboration.
What we're trying to do is bring the two sides of the conversation together and agree on where we can collaborate in a very effective way, but beyond that, see how we might create a pathway to bring all of the industry protagonists together to help build a model that works for all of society.
So that's kind of our journey to date. So at New York, we decided that the KIN had accomplished its goal to catalyze and incubate this entirely new approach for the industry. And for the last year, we've been engaging with all the different stakeholders, obviously, to continue to drive impact. We also decided that we would establish a not-for-profit organization called the Development Partner Institute to be based either in New York or London to continue the innovative work and extend the work of the KIN. We put a plan together that would raise $4 million to fund this over 3 years. And I'm very pleased to announce, and then we set a goal that we would raise $1.3 million to trigger the establishment phase of the Development Partner Institute. 2 weeks ago, we reached that goal of $1.3 million. And I've appointed an interim executive director to now begin the establishment and formation of the Development Partner Institute. And we actually registered our website yesterday, www.dpimining.com and .org as well. We've got both. So it's a very proud moment as we go through this transition phase. And for KIN to have established something that's having tremendous impact and transforming an entire industry that we all absolutely depend on is something that I'm very proud of to be involved with. And I think, nothing ever goes without saying is the recognition of the people that have been involved. First, our financial supporters from Anglo Gold, Anglo American, Castrol, Schneider Electric, 3M, GE, all great brands that do believe in the power and of our ability to change things and had the courage and vision to kind of step out from within their industries. The team members that have been involved, we had a very small, lean, innovative team, okay? Stephanie Walcott, who was involved right through before she moved to Columbia, integral part, Calvia Girl, and other members of the KIN student team as well. And John Samuel, who's been Mark's guy for probably the last 2.5 years. And I think ultimately Mark Kudafani, who really showed true courage, true vision to step out from the leaders of the mining industry and speak in a different way, in a different language, to set the course for the mining industry for the future. So again, very proud of this moment for the KIN and look forward to sharing more news on the Development Partner Institute into the future. Thank you. So now to the world of energy and resources, new worlds, and where are we going? So we've got a great set of speakers to talk to us about that. I just want to kind of set the scene with some, there's things we read and lots of signals in the market that are often contradictory and in conflict with each other. So where do we know, where's the world going as it relates to energy and resources? First, if we can throw up the baby slide, please. This is very important. When every American is born, on that slide shows the amount of resources that person will consume in its lifetime. And it's enormous. And remember, everybody in the developing world is aspiring to live a life similar to what we do in terms of the things they have. So this is the amount of resource that we need. Oil, gas, steel, iron ore, coal, you name it. And even if we drive efficiency, this is an enormous amount of resource that we consume to drive humanity as we know it today and drive our prosperity. And I think this is really something that not a lot of people think about. And then we get signals, great signals. The US actually developed more renewable energy last year than it did in any other energy forms. So solar and wind, new power generation exceeded that of coal and natural gas. Exciting. Yet by 2025, we'll only have about 20% or more of our energy mix in renewables, excluding hydro. Then we have natural gas has now had the biggest impact actually on nailing coal in the USA through unconventional oil and gas development. So then natural gas is coming onto the market. So, and as I said, you know, Eve, we need resources. So take electrical vehicles. Everybody gets excited. I've got an electrical vehicle. I'm not going to use coal. But you are using a lot of resources. So let's take a look at it. So an EV has batteries, and batteries need lithium, cobalt, copper. There's a vast amount of resources. So for example, today the total consumption of lithium in the world is 160,000 tons of lithium, okay? If we get 1 million EVs sold a year in the United States, that's going to increase the total consumption of lithium by 66,000 tons. So that's a lot of mining, a lot of energy to both extract and process those resources, not to mention copper, cobalt, nickel, and all the other resources in an EV. So we need to fundamentally understand that we consume resources. Okay, and as a world, and as a society, and as an industry, an obligation to provide affordable, accessible, and reliable resources, but in a way that has the least environmental impact. And not always those things are aligned. So, and then finally is the social license to operate. Increasingly, society is going, I don't like the way all those industries are operating. So that's kind of the level setting for that. So what I'd like to do now is ask Sonny to come up to talk to us about the world of energy.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Sonny.
Good afternoon. Is it afternoon yet, Rob? We're running late, right? So I always find it interesting to talk about electricity and utilities and innovation, because typically that's an oxymoron if you think about an innovative utility. I always joke that if you brought back Alexander Graham Bell and you showed him this, he'd have no idea what this thing is, none. For most of the electricity industry, you could probably bring back Thomas Edison and he could run any electricity company in the world, right? It's changed that little in 100 years. But we are at the cusp of innovation. We are at the cusp of an enormous amount of change that's going on in the energy industry, and one that introduces a lot of complexity, as Peter was talking about, but also a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs and for innovation. So first of all, I want to think about the 4 factors, keep in your mind what we're always solving for when you're thinking about electricity. You're thinking about safe, reliable, affordable, and now clean, right? For most of the time that we've sort of built these monstrosities of utilities and provided electricity, it's been safe, reliable, and affordable. Clean hasn't been an important factor. Now it's an essential factor, right? If we're going to address climate change, you have to have cleaner sources. So keep those 4 variables in mind, because that's the complexity we need to solve for within the energy industry. Now think about 3 different markets in which we're thinking about electricity. Think about it's underserved or non-consumers. So right now, you've got 1.2 billion people in the world who still don't have electricity. 20% of the world, it's unimaginable. 20% of the world still does not have electricity. Right? The second market is sort of this emerging, growing world of China and India. While everybody's talking about slowing in growth, it's still huge growth numbers, right? You're talking 6, 7, 8% rather than 10%. And then you've got the developed world, sort of like the US and Europe, and what are they going to do to transition? Thinking about those 4 elements. So let me just quickly go through those, and I want to plant some ideas in your head about what some of the fundamental challenges are. In the world where we're introducing it, just introducing electricity, unbelievable opportunity, an unbelievable opportunity for innovation and entrepreneurship, right? People are taking solar panels and basically selling solar panels to people who don't have electricity today. Keep this number in the back of your mind. 1.5 million people die a year from kerosene lamps. 1.5 million, that's 4,000 a day, right? From kerosene lamps. That can be eliminated by these simple solar panels and by providing accessibility in these markets to electricity in a way they never have. The biggest issue there isn't safety, isn't reliability, it isn't clean, because it'll probably be renewable in a large part, it's affordable. So how do we come up with innovative financial models to make it affordable to folks that they can actually have this type of electricity in their homes and get rid of all this kerosene, right? The second market is the growing markets of India and China and in other places, Brazil, other places, that are trying to build electricity, trying to serve an increasing demand, right? The biggest issue there, safety is probably one of the big issues. How are they going to do it in a way that's safe? The one I worry about most is clean, because you can't scale renewables that fast. Renewables aren't base load, so they are going to be using coal, they are going to be using gas. How do we make sure that we are innovating in areas around those, like carbon capture, that we reduce the harmful impacts on the environment? Because they aren't going to slow down coal and gas in the service of climate change in order, and put themselves at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to growth. They're just not. So we have to be thinking innovatively there in that market. And then in our markets, the ones you and I and all know, it's a transition. Electricity is one of the great success stories of these countries, of these developed countries. It's universal in a way that nothing else is. Donato was talking about healthcare being universal. It's not. Education, it's not. I mean, if you think about electricity in the United States, it's safe, it's reliable, it's affordable for everybody. That's something we haven't done on any other type of public good. So how do we transition from that world to introduce clean and do it in a way that we don't screw up the affordable piece, that we don't screw up the safe piece, that we don't screw up the reliable piece? That's the fundamental challenge in the US and in Germany and in other countries that are trying to move towards a cleaner set of fuels and away from oil, gas and oil and coal. The last thing I just want to mention and keep in the back of your mind, because everybody's for renewables. We're all for a cleaner stack. We're all for cleaner opportunities. One of the big distortions going on right now, and one of the big risks that we face in this country regarding electricity and energy, is around affordability for the poor. Because what's happening is we're subsidizing rooftop solar, we're subsidizing electric vehicles, we're subsidizing all these things. Generally, that's for middle and upper class people. So those people are sort of leaving the grid because they have the ability to, they have the financial means to leave the grid. And the people being left are the people who can't leave, right? Some people call this the death spiral of the utility. But the ultimate consequence is that it's still a lot of capital to run a centralized grid. But if you have fewer and fewer people who are paying it, the costs keep going up and up for everybody else. So one of the big risks I see that where we need innovative thinking and entrepreneurship is how are we going to address that problem in a way that the grid doesn't become like Chicago public schools, where everybody who has left, who can leave, has left. And anybody anybody's left behind is paying more for a worse quality. So these are just some of the challenges we're facing on the electricity side, and why I think, 10 years ago, if you'd asked me about innovation in electricity, I would have told you forget about it. And why I think today we're at this cusp of unbelievable opportunity to bring innovative thinking and entrepreneurship across all these markets to really fundamentally change how we deliver this important resource, but also how do we do it in a way that saves our planet.
Thank you, Sonny. Now, John is going to talk to us about kind of the social license issues and a little bit more on that area.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. It is officially good afternoon. Afternoon, everyone. So Peter's asked me to talk a little bit about why Anglo-American actually got involved with the KIN, with the Development Partner Framework, and ultimately being one of the founding sponsors for the Development Partner Institute. And I suppose it's worth winding back a bit to about 2010 to 2012, when we'd had the global financial crisis, but the natural resources sector recovered pretty quickly from that. I was just looking at a chart online this morning, and our share price was up in the £30 level at that time. It touched £2.15 in January this year. We're now up at £6. But things looked good. China demand was booming. Prices were high. Profits were very high. And so on the one hand, we thought we were doing pretty well, and we weren't well prepared for what came along after that, because there were lots of things going wrong in the background that we weren't really probably as aware of as we should have been and didn't know how to manage. And I think there are a few key things. So firstly, productivity was declining, and it was declining quite rapidly. And if that's happening in your business, you've got a fundamental problem long term. Secondly, we were finding that it was getting increasingly difficult to develop new projects and to operate. In fact, we were seen as a cash cow. We were seen as having very deep pockets, and that led to all sorts of challenges for us. So, for example, regulation was becoming more onerous, taxation was becoming more onerous, even though actually as a sector, over the cycle, mining struggles to sort of meet its cost of capital and deliver returns to investors. We were finding it very difficult at site level as well, and we were getting lots of interventions from third parties that previously hadn't shown much interest in this rather old-fashioned, unglamorous industry. And so we counted at one point about 150 separate initiatives looking at the governance of the mining sector. These were all international initiatives. There was much more going on in country, of course, as well. And that was manifesting itself in lots of people trying to have a say in how we run our business. So, of course, governments as the regulators, and then multilaterals setting standards for us, but also NGOs, of course, were becoming increasingly effective, investors, customers were starting to want to know about how we were producing things, and even some of our suppliers. I remember the shock when one of our Scandinavian suppliers came and audited our platinum business and started giving us advice. We thought that was a bit improper, but that was the world we're in. And it seemed particularly odd to us because miners actually take a great deal of pride. Certainly the people in the mining, the leading mining companies, we take a great deal of pride and can point to some genuinely progressive actions. So our company, Anglo-American, we were the first company worldwide to offer all of our workers free HIV/AIDS treatment, for example, back in 2002 when the South African government was saying that treatment wasn't the solution and so on and so forth. So the industry has done a number of genuinely quite progressive things on things like revenue transparency, on things like human rights, indigenous rights, community development, but yet we were still not getting it right, and we were becoming increasingly unpopular. And I think it was when Mark Cutifani was here at King Global in 2011 that he seemed to sort of get some thoughts together. And I think he was very much stimulated by seeing the innovation in other sectors that he saw as actually incredibly absent in our sectors. And he was seeing how that innovation was serving the stakeholders in those sectors in a way that we weren't. And he became convinced that we were failing host communities and governments in terms of the development and the environmental impacts we were having. We were failing shareholders because our productivity wasn't what it could be. And we were failing customers because we were actually not producing reliable, high-quality volumes at an affordable price, which ultimately is what businesses should be about. So, as I said, he saw the innovation that was so evident amongst many of the other sectors, including sectors that we thought were quite like ourselves. So, utilities or the oil and gas sector, which we thought they were like us. But when we looked at their R&D budgets, I think Baker Hughes alone had an R&D budget that was greater than the entire membership of the International Council on Mining and Metals, and by some margin. So that led to Mark having a conversation with Peter about how we could start to bring some of the expertise in this room to bear on mining. And that led to the Kin Mining Catalyst. And I think three key things came out of that. One was we ourselves have actually adopted a different approach to R&D and innovation. We've got an open forum approach now. We used to have proprietary R&D in our labs. Secondly, it led to the faith group engagement that Peter touched on and which was mentioned in the video. And then thirdly, it led to the development partner framework. And the interesting thing about the DPF is if you've been following mining and sustainable development debates, and you probably haven't, but had you been doing so, you probably wouldn't find too many things in the DPF that were that different for things that were being said by our industry association, the International Council on Mining and Metals, which is unique because its purpose is to advance sustainable development in the sector. So it doesn't lobby, but rather explores and develops best practices which members subscribe to. They'd done similar work. People like the International Finance Corporation had done similar work, but it hadn't got much traction with stakeholders. And I think the process that the Kin was able to convene brought a wide range of stakeholders that we'd never been able to reach. NGOs, First Nations in Canada, for example, some of the UN agencies that traditionally had a bit of a dim view of our industry, faith groups and so on, as well as suppliers, existing suppliers, but also suppliers in other sectors who were looking at the problems we were facing and saying, we solved that 10 years ago. So that's, that was the genesis of the DPF. And I think the interesting thing for us, and the key takeaway for us from the DPF has been that actually it wasn't so much the ideas that came out of that process. It was the process itself, and I think we've learned a few key things. So firstly, if we control the process, we're not going to get the people in the room that we need to get in the room, and actually we don't even know who all of those people are. So having a neutral third-party space is really important for us as a sector to hear those different voices, and for those voices to feel free and comfortable to come and share with us and suggest things to us without fear of being co-opted, for example. Secondly, we found that lots of the problems we're facing have been faced by other sectors, and that they've been overcome with greater or lesser success in other sectors. So there's lots of experience we can draw on from that. We also, we came to realize that that we needed a future platform to keep those conversations going. The DPF was a product, the faith group engagement was a spin-out from the Kin Catalyst, but actually we recognized that although we'd had that conversation, there were many more conversations that we needed to have. So that's really what the DPI is about. And I'm working with Peter, working with Mark Cutifani to get it up and running, and people keep asking me, well, what's the work program? And part of the answer is actually we don't know. Most of the conversations we think the DPI should have, we don't know what they are yet. We know some. And we'll explore those. People are quite keen to bring some conversations into that forum. But actually, overall, we think the more important thing is that there's a neutral space that stakeholders can feel comfortable in, that's multi-stakeholder governance. It's not an industry body, it's not a government body, it's not an NGO body. So we can come together, we can explore those debates, and who knows what will come out next. We honestly don't know. We think we know some of the things that need to be discussed are things like artisanal mining are massive issues in our sector. They're not being well explored at the moment. But it's partly a leap of faith, but I think we've actually got tremendous traction. And Mark's taking a real risk, and I admire him for that. There's some interest from the sector, and interestingly, particular from some of the more progressive small companies who don't necessarily have access to the big industry tables like ICMM. So we'll see how it goes, and we'll come back next year and tell you a bit more about how we got on and what we're achieving. But and some of that will be news to us, and some of it we hope we've got in mind. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. So next up as well to talk how we're going to accelerate all this change that we see ahead of us. Thank you, Wal.
Acceleration of change. Well, we look still at this baby picture. I wonder why this is still here, but many of you were born when the first man landed on the moon. And last year, Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon, was interviewed. And they asked him, Buzz, when you stepped on the moon, what do you think that the world would be by 2050? And he said, of course, I thought that by now we would have flying cars and colonies on Mars, and instead we got Facebook and Twitter. But this is very important. We developed a lot of technologies that we have used on the easy stuff. With Silicon Valley, we have played the first maybe 2 innings in innovation. Now the hard stuff starts, and that is rolling it out in these very large industries. This is not just innovation, this is a major change program. Every company needs to become an IT company. Every operation needs to become sustainable. And if we don't do it, somebody else will do it. I travel all over the world, very, very frequently. Only in the past 3 weeks, I've had discussions with business leaders all over the world. And there's a very subtle, but very different element in the discussion with business leaders in North America and Europe and business leaders in Europe. We all talk about innovation. We all talk about change. But at the end of the day, we in the West are trying to hold on to the past. We are trying to milk the cow as long as possible and are never willing to really think about when should I eat the cow. Whereas in Asia, I see much more eager people thinking about shaping the future. It's a massive change program. So talk is cheap. How do we move? How, for example, very importantly, how do we realize where we are? I've heard people say here, we are at the cusp of a major takeoff. No. We are in the middle of it. But even if you zoom in at an exponential curve, it still looks linear. You need to realize that we are really at the middle of a takeoff. Now, how can we help big industries accelerate? The core of innovation was Silicon Valley. And all over the world, when I speak about innovation at business schools, I hear a lot of Silicon Valley enviness. There's a lot of innovation that needs to take place outside of Silicon Valley. The very big problem that we had in many industries is that we thought in order to do innovation, we take the innovation model from Silicon Valley, the VC model, and one-on-one we copy it in many other industries.
We had the clean tech failures. Everybody has heard of Solyndra. Why was that? Because we used the VC model from Silicon Valley and thought it would painlessly work in other industries. But in other industries, you have these very big invested interests. There is not a greenfield situation like you have with a Twitter or a Facebook. It's fundamentally different. So what are lessons? Lessons are really for innovators, understand the pain points and the opportunities of traditional industries, and then go sourcing for solutions. Technologies often combined with new business models. It's very important. It is not just technology pushing new technologies in the hands of early adopter customers who are willing to pay a premium, for example, for clean. If we talk energy, water, other resources, these are commodity industries. And if there's one thing true in a commodity industry, it's cost is king. There cannot be just technology push. So it's very important to source deals for real solutions. Then the issue is, how do you build winning young companies? Can you do that within the halls of big companies? No, probably not. Most people in small companies, most entrepreneurs would never, ever want to work in a big company. So you need to ensure that you build the right team and provide the right mentorship so that these people understand what the demands are of large companies. And then the third element is provide what I call matchmaking services. Provide people who can really ensure that small companies can transition into large companies to provide the solutions the large companies need. It is very, very essential. Matchmaking. Last but not least, it's about leadership. We need to really ensure that we get a whole new set of leaders who can create a culture of innovation. When we talk about utilities, one of the big problems is middle management. Middle management will feel very safe to buy the same widgets they bought in the past 20 years. If you buy the same widget, you can never go wrong. But the moment you do something new, the probability that your job is on the line is very high. We need leaders who can instill a culture of innovation so that middle management can start moving. And it's really what the leaders need to do is take a step forward in the innovation direction and look back. And are some of the middle managers starting to move? If they don't believe in you, you cannot go to the next phase. Only when they start to move, you can make your next step. And then the masters start to come with you, then you can execute on your innovation program. I have used more time than I think I was entitled to. But I want to leave you with this message. It's a very important message. If we don't step up in our traditional industries, somebody else will do this. We could wake up by 2022 and realize that others elsewhere in the world own the industries of the future. I would rather be a seller than a buyer of the new stuff that we need for the jobs and the wealth creation of the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sonny. So I think we have time for one question, which I'll throw. So this is not the question we discussed out the back, guys. So actually, I just want to pick this accelerant thing. I mean, we think about, what's the role, if any? So some people think it's all about government regulation. The government's got to come down and regulate and pass legislation that's going to drive us to this new future. Other people go, we need to drive a price on carbon, and that's what's going to drive us. Other people say we should rely on the market forces, and it'll get us there. So a new viewpoint is it one of those? Is it a mix, or is it something else that's going to get us there? Because there's a lot of confusion about this, I think, when you speak to a lot of people. So, Sonny, do you want to tackle
to
this?
go
'Cause-
first? Wow, that's a big
yeah, well, no, I
question.
just got right over you.
Well, look, I mean, I think it depends on what you're solving for, right? You go back to the idea of safe, reliable, affordable, clean. So it depends on what you're solving for with regard to what types of interventions you think are going to matter the most. I think that if you're trying to move towards a cleaner stack, I don't see from a competitive perspective today the market doing that on its own, right? I mean, I just don't see how you get there without some type of government regulation, some type of government intervention to encourage that to happen. And that's typically what we've seen is without the government policies, you wouldn't have wind the way it is today. You wouldn't have solar the way it is today. You wouldn't have energy storage. You wouldn't have any of this stuff. So I think if you're solving for trying to drive towards a cleaner stack, then I mean, there may be people out here much smarter than me. I don't see how the market solves for that on its own. I think you're going to need some type of government regulation. I would argue for either a carbon tax or cap and trade, because then it puts a price on carbon versus picking specific industries and giving them the subsidies. It's creating a market, at least, where the best idea can win.
Okay, great. So, John.
Yeah, I agree with Sonny that it's very dependent on the problem you're trying to solve. So one of our big challenges in mining is actually delivering positive community development outcomes to host communities. And you know, some governments have tried to regulate for that, and they tried to regulate us for that. But actually, if it was as easy as passing a law, they'd have passed a law that was binding to local government or provincial government, and it would have happened. So, and actually what we find quite often is those attempts are counterproductive, and they force us to spend money on things that we know either have no benefit and sometimes actually are counterproductive. You know, so often very infrastructure-led things that people can be sure that you've done, where actually it's the intangible stuff of institutions and capacity building which has a much bigger impact, but which is obviously much harder to measure and much harder to prove that you've done. So I think it does depend on what you've done. And you know, coming from the UK, we spent 50s, 60s, and 70s picking winners, and it was a conspicuous failure. So you know, maybe that experience hasn't been had this side of the Atlantic. But you know, so I don't think governments have an easy job. I've never wanted to be in politics, and one of the reasons is I don't know how you solve half the problems they're expected to solve.
Thank you, John. Wal, you want to?
Well, I would leave it to the market. That means, first and for all, we need to start creating a level playing field. We talked about subsidies for the new stuff, but I mean, the enormous subsidies that are currently still going in traditional hydrocarbons are just in oil and gas in the range of 500–600 billion every year. And then we're not talking about utility subsidies, coal subsidies, and so on. So create a level playing field, have a carbon tax. Carbon tax can be introduced tax neutral. We've done this in British Columbia very successfully. That model has been applied by now in a growing number of other jurisdictions all over the world. But combination of create a level playing field and a carbon and a tax neutral carbon tax is the way to go.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, guys. I think just to wrap up a few points, then I'll hand back to Rob to maybe take us closer to lunch. But I think, you know, what we've heard today is that, you know, there is a transformation underway. I think it's going to take a lot of courageous and visionary leadership, actually, to take us forward in a way that is meaningful to deliver. And I think, Sonny, as you call it, those 4 pillars that we have to deliver on. Some key points I liked is the death spiral of the utility. I like that. But as President Fox said, you know, the distortion of the system is we're leaving behind all the people that can't afford what it is we're doing, the vanguard. So I think we have a responsibility to figure out a business model innovation that doesn't leave everybody that can't afford electrical vehicles, solar and wind today, and leave them behind with a much costlier impact. I have to pick on you, John, for a little bit with a great British understatement. It's a bit improper in terms of having a supplier giving you advice. So that is always our tables are turning. But I think the great insight you gave, John, was you were doing great financially, but underneath the blankets on sustainability, on social issues and environmental issues, the company was doing really badly and it was being ignored. So having that more holistic lens, I think, is important. And again, a leader that does that. Everyone needs to become an IT company and become sustainable. I think that's very important. And then, finally, get over Silicon Valley envy. I think it's true. I mean, we all have to chart our own path, and I think for every region, not only in the United States, but globally, is sure, take insights, but, chart your own path, chart what's right for your culture. And I think together, and as a collective globally, then I think movement will start occurring. So please join me in thanking Sonny, John, and Wal for a great panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you to the panelists, John, and to Mark Cutifani, a big thanks. His leadership with the Development Partner Framework development and now the DPI has been extraordinary. We couldn't have done it without Anglo. Certainly all the other companies that have been involved, but Anglo-American was fundamental. And Sonny and Wal, thank you so much for your time and your insights and your passion as well around this essential industry. Let's give them another round of applause.
Thanks, Wal.